Washington, President Trump's legal defense team mounted an aggressive offense on Saturday as it opened its side in the Senate impeachment trial by attacking his Democratic accusers as partisan witch hunters trying to remove him from office because they could not beat him at the ballot box. After 3 days of arguments by the House managers prosecuting Mr. Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors, the president's lawyers presented the senators a radically different view of the facts and the Constitution, seeking to turn the Democrats' charges back on them while denouncing the whole process as illegitimate. "They're asking you to tear up all of the ballots all across the country on your own initiative. Take that decision away from the American people." Pat A. Cipollone, the White House counsel, said of the House managers. "They're here," he added moments later, "to perpetrate the most massive interference in an election in American history, and we can't allow that to happen." The president's team spent only 2 of the 24 hours allotted to them so that senators could leave town for the weekend before the defense presentation resumes on Monday, but it was the first time his lawyers have formally made a case for him since the House opened its inquiry in September. The goal was to poke holes in the House managers' arguments, in order to provide enough fodder to Senate Republicans already inclined to acquit him. While less combative than their famously combustible client, the lawyers relentlessly assailed the prosecution's interpretation of events, accusing House Democrats of cherry-picking the facts and leaving out contrary information to construct a skewed narrative. They maintained that none of what the Democrats presented the Senate justified the first eviction of a president from the White House in American history. "They have the burden of proof," Mr. Cipollone said, "and they have not come close to meeting it." After the session, Democrats contended that the White House arguments actually bolstered their demand to call witnesses like John R. Bolton, the president's former national security advisor, and Mick Mulvaney, his acting White House chief of staff, as well as required documents be turned over, all of which the Republican majority so far has rejected. They kept saying there are no eyewitness accounts, Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic leader, told reporters. "But there are people that have eyewitness accounts. The very 4 witnesses, and the very 4 sets of documents that we have asked for." The abbreviated weekend session wrapped up 5 days of presentations and arguments on the Senate floor in the country's 3rd presidential impeachment trial, with Mr. Trump's fate on the line. The trial, unfolding less than 10 months before he faces re-election, has come to encapsulate the pitched 3-year struggle that has consumed Washington since he took office, determined to disrupt the existing order, at times in ways that crossed long-standing lines. While he did not attend Saturday's opening of his defense, as he had previously suggested he might, Mr. Trump watched from the White House and weighed in on Twitter with attacks on prominent Democrats including Mr. Schumer, Representative Adam B. Schiff of California, the lead prosecutor for Democrats, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, portraying the day as a chance to put them on trial instead. "Our case against Lyon, Cheaton, Little, Adam, Shifty, Schiff, crying Chuck Schumer, nervous Nancy Pelosi, their leader, dumb as a rock AOC." With the odds stacked against him in the Democratic-run House, Mr. Trump refused to send lawyers to participate in Judiciary Committee hearings last month, complaining that he was not given due process. But he faced a more receptive audience in the Senate, where the White House has been working in tandem with Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, the Republican majority leader. President Trump's defense team will draw a more receptive audience in the Republican-controlled Senate, where the White House has been working in tandem with Senator Mitch McConnell of Kentucky. Credit Anna Moneymaker, The New York Times. Even after the prosecution's presentation, Mr. Trump appeared certain to win acquittal in a trial that requires the support of 2/3 of senators for conviction. So the main priority for the president's legal team as it opened its arguments was not to undermine its own advantage or give wavering moderate Republican senators reasons to support Democratic requests for witnesses and documents. A vote on that question will not come until next week, and it remained the central question of the impeachment trial, with the potential to either prolong the process and yield new revelations that could further damage Mr. Trump, or bring the proceeding to a swift conclusion. But after long days of exhaustive arguments by the House managers, there was little indication that there would be enough Republican support to consider new evidence, even as a 2018 recording was made public later Saturday in which Mr. Trump appeared to order the firing of the United States ambassador to Ukraine. Republican senators seemed relieved to finally have the president's side of the debate presented on the floor. They completely undermined the case of the Democrats and truly undermined the credibility of Adam Schiff, Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming told reporters afterward. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, who joined Mr. Trump on stage to address abortion opponents at the March for Life on Friday, said the president's lawyers showed that the managers were selective in their presentation of the facts. It happened over and over again for 3 days where they really cherry-pick one part of a sentence and then would not read the full part of the sentence, he said. Today we got a chance to see the whole sentence, Mr. Trump faces 2 articles of impeachment for abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, stemming from his effort to pressure Ukraine to announce investigations into his Democratic rivals while withholding nearly $400 million in congressionally approved security aid, a decision that a government agency called a violation of law. The House managers have argued the president's actions amounted to a corrupt scheme to invite foreign interference on his behalf in the 2020 election, and part of a dangerous pattern of behavior by Mr. Trump of using the machinery of government for his own benefit. But Mr. Cipollone belittled the weight of the allegations, suggesting the Constitution's framers had in mind something more consequential when they created the impeachment clause than what the House managers had presented. They've come here today and they've basically said, let's cancel an election over a meeting with the Ukraine, he said. The president's lawyers maintained that he had every right to set foreign policy as he saw fit and that he had valid concerns about corruption in Ukraine and burden sharing with Europe that prompted him to suspend the aid temporarily. They also argued that he was protecting presidential prerogatives when he refused to allow aides to testify or provide documents in the House proceedings. Michael Purpura, a deputy White House counsel, noted that Mr. Trump did not explicitly link American aid to his demand for investigations during his July 25 phone call with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, and pointed to Mr. Zelensky's public statements that he did not feel pressured. Mr. Purpura added that there could not have been an illicit quid pro quo, because the Ukrainians did not know about the aid freeze until a month later. But American and Ukrainian officials have said in fact they did know as early as the day of the president's call. Mr. Purpura dismissed much of the prosecution evidence as hearsay, and played video clips of former officials saying they knew of no quid pro quo. He also played a succession of clips of Gordon D. Sondland, the ambassador to the European Union, testifying that he presumed there was a link between the suspended aid and the demand for investigations but did not actually know it for a fact. Yet in parts of Mr. Sondland's testimony that the president's lawyers did not show, the ambassador said he had been involved in a pressure campaign on Ukraine aimed at getting the country to announce investigations into Mr. Trump's political rivals, directed by the president himself. Mr. Sondland also said there had been a clear quid pro quo, conditioning a White House meeting for the Ukrainian president to his willingness to announce the investigations Mr. Trump wanted, and that everyone was in the loop about the arrangement. Following the president's lead, his lawyers targeted Mr. Schiff, replaying video from a hearing last year in which he embellished Mr. Trump's conversation with Ukraine's leader for dramatic effect and said he was describing the sum in character of what the president had tried to communicate. That's fake. Mr. Purpura said after the clip ended. That's not the real call. That's not the evidence here. Under the trial rules, the House managers had no speaking opportunity on the floor on Saturday, but they delivered a 28,578-page trial record to the Secretary of the Senate that served as the foundation of their case. At a news conference following the arguments by Mr. Trump's lawyers, Mr. Schiff offered a point-by-point rebuttal and said the attacks on him and his colleagues were just an attempt to distract from the evidence. When your client is guilty or your client is dead to rights, you don't want to talk about your client's guilt, said Mr. Schiff, a former prosecutor. You want to attack the prosecution. Representative Gerald Nadler of New York, another manager, dismissed as nonsense the allegation that Democrats were trying to improperly steal an election. The point of the impeachment provision in the Constitution is to deal with dangerous presidents who cheat on elections and try to cheat in stealing the election as this president did, and is trying for the next time. Mr. Nadler said. The White House arguments on Saturday were meant to be what Jay Sekulow, another of the president's lawyers, called a sneak preview before being resumed on Monday. Like the managers before them, the White House lawyers have 24 hours over as many as 3 days to present their side, but said they will not use all of that, playing to the exhaustion of senators who grew weary as the House team used nearly all of its time, going late into the evening night after night, often repeating many of the same arguments. After the president's defense is complete, the senators themselves will enter the trial for the first time, although even then without speaking. They will have up to 16 hours over a couple of days to submit questions in writing that will be read by Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr., who is presiding over the trial. The Senate will then consider any motions to dismiss the case or to call witnesses and demand documents. The House managers need at least 4 Republican senators to join the Democrats to call witnesses. If no witnesses are called and no motion to dismiss the case is passed, the Senate would then move to final deliberations on conviction or acquittal, with a verdict possible as early as next week. Michael D. Shear and Emily Cochran contributed reporting. Let's block ads. Why?